In 1963, French science fiction novelist Pierre Boulle wrote a novel entitled Planet des Singes, which translates to Planet of the Apes in English. In the novel, the roles of humans and apes are reversed, critiquing human nature and colonialism in a satirical lens. Over recent years, Boulle's work has become more familiar with the numerous adaptations his novel received. With over 10 film adaptations and 2 short-lived TV series, this recurring franchise lends precedent to the fact that we as humans have always been fascinated by the idea of monosentience and cognitive exceptionalism. Predating Boulle's work, in the 1920s, there was a Soviet scientist who was fascinated in the idea of a planet of the apes. Born in 1870, Ivanov was credited for always being someone who wanted to push the boundaries of science, whether that be through genuine curiosity or hubris. Studying physiology at Kharkov University, then later studying bacteriology in Paris, Ivanov returned to Russia in 1898, working alongside experimental neurologists and psychologists such as Ivan Pavlov at Russia's very own Imperial Institute of Experimental Medicine. Yet as time went on, the thing that would go on to define Ivanov was never his desire to observe, but rather his burning desire to create. This drive really ignited him into investing a lot of his time into the concept of artificial insemination. Initially, Ivanov viewed artificial insemination not merely as a method for treating infertility, but as a powerful tool for the mass improvement of livestock. He aimed to rapidly compensate for Russia's lower proportion of thoroughbreds compared to other European countries. By World War I, his pioneering work had established Imperial Russia as a world leader in the practical application of artificial insemination in farming, having performed the method on 6,804 mares and over 1,000 sheep. He developed specific techniques such as using a special sponge and rubber catheters to maximize sperm collection and inseminate a greater number of animals per stallion, even with diminished sperm amounts. By introducing it directly into the uterus, Ivanov saw artificial insemination as an experimental tool for constructing new forms of life that did not exist in nature. Ivanov, as a biologist, would spend hours of his day at Eskania Nova, a Ukrainian animal reserve. However, hidden behind his investment of understanding artificial insemination, a thought lingered in the back of his head. Would it be possible to create animal hybrids? This thought and question would transform itself from a simple question to an obsession, to the point where his interest in creating animal hybrids became his life's sole goal. But let's take a step back. How would this even be perceived by other biologists and researchers in the scientific community? Wouldn't this obviously pose an ethical question about the usage of animals? Historically speaking, at the time, hybridization was seen as the forefront of what biology could offer, posing a great benefit to society as seen by agricultural usages, but at the same time, artificial hybridization presented numerous ethical issues. Generally speaking, at the time, state and church were associated ideas, which would imply that ideas such as artificial insemination and hybridization would be an attempt for science to play the role of God. On top of this, we haven't even discussed the fact that to accomplish the following, we would literally have to either force 2 other species of animals to mate knowingly or unknowingly. Yet this could not, or would not, I should probably say, stop Ivanov from pursuing the concept of hybridization. In 1910, during a talk at the International Zoology Congress in Graz, Ivanov publicly mentioned the possibility of inseminating a female ape with human sperm, noting that using artificial insemination would help circumvent ethical objections that inevitably arose in the case of natural pairing. Understandably, by proposing a non-sexual method of cross-species reproduction, Ivanov attempted to frame his idea as scientifically legitimate rather than a deviant idea. However, this assertion would fall to empty ears to others in the community, leading to numerous scientists seeing Ivanov as a peculiar fellow who seemed to really love apes. Yet Ivanov's research would face a greater issue with the Russian Revolution in 1917. During this time, Ivanov lost almost everything. His funding network was destroyed due to his previous patrons now being unable to provide any support. Remember Eskania Nova? Well, this site, where he intended to carry out more research, was terribly devastated during the revolution, with the owner of the reserve and yet again another patron of his, Friedrich Pfalz-Fein, immigrating to Germany in 1918, effectively ending that source of support. Furthermore, Ivanov would be stripped of his position among the Academy of Sciences, losing his lab. On top of all this, the economy itself had suffered big time, depriving him of any material needs for his own research. Nonetheless, Nevertheless, Ivanov would relocate to Moscow in 1919, founding the Central Experimental Station of Reproduction of Domestic Animals, his new home base under the Soviet Commissariat of Agriculture. With that being said, it was not the smoothest of sailing. Ivanov would often write to other geneticists across the world, expressing his disdain. Of these geneticists, Ivanov would write to American Herman J. Mueller, complaining about lacking even the most elementary equipment, and now he most likely would not be able to continue his work in artificial insemination. From 1921 to 1924, Ivanov contemplated giving up science as a whole and leaving the country, but realistically, Ivanov knew that his language barrier and the existing political tension would not allow him to do so. Understanding that, Ivanov had to reinvent himself. He came crawling back to the idea of primate biology and fundamentally exploring the mystery of human origin, going as far as having his assistant Mikhail gather information on the subject as well as write letters to American biologist Raymond Pearl about the theoretical possibility of the human-chimpanzee hybrid he had envisioned creating 10 years earlier. In 1924, Ivanov would visit his old stomping grounds in Paris, meeting up with two French scientists offering him free access to their chimpanzee facility in Canidia, French Guiana, but they had no money to fund Ivanov's operation, so Ivanov turned back to the Soviets. Soviet officials backed him enthusiastically. To them, this was no ordinary science, rather it was a weapon against religion. A human-ape hybrid could deliver a decisive blow to the idea of divine creation. Nikolai Gorbanov, Lenin's former secretary and a key patron of Soviet science, pushed it forward. Thus, by September 1925, Gorbanov secured the funding needed from the government's financial commission. Ivanov now had the funding he fought almost the entire back half of his scientific career for. Ivanov presented his project to the Psycho-Mathematical Division of the Academy of Sciences, framing it as a path to understanding the origin of man, heredity, embryology, and even comparative psychology. The Academy approved his mission mainly due to the way that Ivanov presented it, pushing aside the arguably controversial ethics of inseminating apes with human sperm. With funding and approval now, Ivanov would go ahead and build a Soviet primate station in Georgia to essentially bring back his completed hybridized species. When Ivanov and his son touched down in French Guiana, the two of them attempted for 2 years to obtain viable sperms or for the females to conceive, but unbeknownst to them, the primates were all prepubescent. And over the course of these 2 years, the duo would only complete 3 insemination attempts on the chimpanzee females, with a success rate of 30%. Now, this task was never easy, but what if I told you that they were doing all of this in secret? Yes, you heard me right. Those in charge of the conservatory thought and were under the impression that Ivanov and his son were just observing the primates rather than collecting anything from them. This led to the two of them having to use force when handling the apes due to the secrecy, which in turn reduced the chances of successful impregnation. Ivanov's son would even be bitten during their time with the apes. On top of this, an amoebic outbreak killed many of the apes and led Ivanov to often question the purpose of what he was even doing with this experiment. Upon realizing the difficulty and expense of obtaining apes, Ivanov shifted his focus to the easier and cheaper alternative of inseminating women volunteers with ape sperm. He intended to do this without the woman's knowledge and consent, hoping for better cooperation in a hospital setting. While the colonial governor in French Guiana initially showed understanding, he later categorically banned these experiments in the hospital, indicating that even in a colonial context, such a blatant violation of consent was unacceptable. Crucially, the Soviet Academy of Sciences expressed the abhorrence and indignation when they realized Ivanov had attempted to inseminate African women without consent and subsequently deprived him of any further support from the Academy. They feared such actions would undermine trust in European researchers and jeopardize future Russian scientific expeditions to Africa. Though initially embraced by Bolshevik officials for its ideological utility as a decisive blow to the religious teachings and a problem for materialism, the project's support within the Soviet system became precarious. Ivanov was linked to the Communist Academy and its Society of Materialist Biologists, which supported the continuation of his experiments with women volunteers for idealistic reasons. However, this period coincided with the Cultural Revolution, which involved intense criticism and purges of old specialists. By the end of 1930, several of Ivanov's key supporters within the Communist Academy lost their positions and influence. Ivanov's main patron, Nikolai Gorbanov, was also dismissed from his government, posing post due to political purges. The broader Stalinist culture that emerged emphasized order and hierarchy, traditional family values, and eventually led to the repudiation of genetics altogether. This ideological environment made the continuation of such controversial human hybridization experiments impossible. During the escalating Cultural Revolution, Ivanov as an old specialist came under political criticism. In May and June of 1930, he was publicly attacked at the Experimental Veterinary Institute by younger associates who accused him of sabotage and wrecking. On December 13th of 1930, Ilya Ivanov was arrested by the Soviet secret police, convicted of having created a counter-revolutionary organization among agricultural specialists, and exiled for 5 years to Alma-Ata, the capital of the Kazakh Republic. Although Stalin publicly criticized the excesses of specialist raiding, in June 1931, leading to a reversal of the trend, Ivanov's civil status would not be restored until February 1st of 1932, allowing him to live anywhere in the USSR. Yet, his health had significantly deteriorated during his imprisonment and exile in Central Asia. In the end, Ivanov died from a stroke in Alma-Ata on March 20th of 1932 at the age of 61, one day before the scheduled departure to Moscow and then to the health resort. He never published anything on his controversial primate work. While his earlier work on artificial insemination in farming and interspecific hybridization in Askania Nova was remembered in later Soviet culture, his primate project was largely forgotten. In conclusion, Ilya Ivanov's human-ape hybridization experiments reveal the perilous blend of ambition, ideology, and ethical failure. Initially promoted by the Soviet regime to support materialist doctrine, the project collapsed under logistical challenges, scientific naivety, and Ivanov's disregard for consent and humane treatment of others. Political support soon reversed, leading to his arrest and the suppression of his work. Ivanov's story warns of the dangers of science unchecked by ethics, showing how ideology can fuel abuses of humans and animals in the name of progress. Like later misuses under totalitarian regimes, it underscores the need for accountability and ethical limits in research. Though his primate station endured, the hybridization project remains a dark chapter, a reminder that true scientific progress depends not only on discovery but on integrity. Ivanov's failure continues to echo as proof that ethics and inquiry are inseparable, and while we should consider what we can do, we should also consider should we do it.